Welcome to Priestess Initiations, the Goddess Coven. I'm Casey Dunn, educator, priestess, and professional somatic therapist. In April 2025, I went through a priestess initiation of old and launched the Priestess Initiations podcast 6 months later. Whatever brought you here today, I invite you to drop into the spiral with me. Let's begin. Welcome back to Priestess Initiations, the Goddess Coven. I'm Casey, and today we're talking about astrology as archetypes, Saturn as Kronos, the divine masculine cosmic teacher, and what happens when Saturn moves into Aries this Friday the 13th. We're also going to talk about Saturn return, what it actually is, what it means psychologically and developmentally, and I'm going to share my Saturn return story because mine ends this Friday after nearly 3 years, and I'm excited for it to end, but also deeply grateful for everything it taught me. Because Saturn taught me to honor my body, that I can't build something great on unstable foundations, that it's okay to need physical and material safety as solid ground to work from. And I'm constantly working to build what that means for myself. I haven't arrived yet, I'm still building. But first, let's look at this week's astrology, because we're entering eclipse season and Saturn is making a major move. This Friday, February 13th, Saturn enters Aries, and it's not coming back to Pisces. This is it. Saturn will be in Aries until 2028. For those of you who've been in your Saturn return in Pisces, like me, this is the official end. The teacher is moving on for approximately another 30 years. The lessons of this cycle are complete. What you do with what you've learned is now up to you. And for those of you with Saturn in Aries natal, welcome. Your Saturn return is coming. Saturn will retrograde back and forth over your natal Saturn degree over the next couple years. Last May through August 2025 was your preview, and now it's your time to learn from the master teacher that is Saturn. And for all of us collectively, Saturn in Aries is a major shift. Saturn is structure, discipline, maturity, responsibility. Aries is action, courage, pioneering, the warrior. Saturn in Aries is disciplined action, mature courage, taking responsibility for forging your own path. We're also entering eclipse season. Next Tuesday, February 17th, will be kind of wild. We have a new moon solar eclipse in Aquarius on the Chinese New Year as we move into the year of the fire horse. It's the start of the Chinese New Year. And that is new beginnings, innovation, collective vision. But eclipses bring fated shifts. Something ends so something new can begin. And as if that wasn't enough energy, Saturn will be conjunct Neptune at 0 degrees Aries on February 20th, 2026, which signals the start of something new collectively. The last time that happened was the fall of the Berlin Wall. So just throwing that out there. And on March 3rd, we have a full moon lunar eclipse in Virgo. I'll talk more about that then, but that's completion, release, purification, letting go of what no longer serves your health, your systems, your daily practices. But the eclipse portal opens now as Saturn moves, meaning change is happening, major structural fated change, and it's happening rapidly. The old foundations are crumbling, new ones are being built, and it's not all scary, right? Saturn is entering Aries on Friday the 13th, which in the Western world is a day traditionally now associated with bad luck, with fear, with the witch wound. But that feels perfect to me because Saturn isn't bad luck. Saturn is the teacher. And Friday the 13th isn't cursed, it's sacred. It's the day of the goddess. The number 13 is the day of the goddess. So take some time this Friday to honor her, even just by getting outside. Saturn says build something solid. When on unstable ground, create solid structures for yourself. Build enough safety in yourself and your community to become part of forging something new. Patreon members get the full Weekly transit list every Monday at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. All right, so let's begin. Before we dive into Saturn as Kronos, we need to talk about what an archetype actually is. Because when we talk about planets as gods and goddesses, we're not talking about literal deities floating around in space. We're talking about archetypal patterns. And the planets that we're talking about are named after the deities. And so Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, developed the concept of archetypes as part of his theory of the collective unconscious, which we talked a little bit about last episode on the Akashic Records. And Jung said that archetypes are universal patterns or templates that exist in the collective psyche of all humans. They're inherited psychological structures, like the mother, the hero, the shadow, the wise old man, the trickster. These aren't learned, they're built into us. They show up across cultures, across time, in myths, dreams, and stories. And here's what's important. Archetypes are not just ideas. They're psychological forces. They influence how we think, feel, behave, and make meaning of our lives. And when we encounter an archetype, whether it's in a dream, a story, or a relationship, we recognize it. We feel it because it's already inside us. And I also believe there's like an archetypal realm that we're channeling when we work with that. But astrology works with archetypes, and that's why I'm talking about astrology on here. And this might be your biggest astrology episode because the astrology this week is too wild not to talk about it. And so each planet in astrology represents an archetypal force, right? The sun is the conscious self, the individuation journey. You could even think of the sun as the hero archetype. The moon is the mother, the emotional body, your inner world. Mars is the warrior, Venus is the lover, Mercury is the messenger. And Saturn is the teacher, the father, the wise old man who demands maturity. And in ancient mythology, Saturn is the Roman name for the Greek god Kronos, the titan who ruled before Zeus, who ate his children to prevent them from overthrowing him, who was eventually overthrown anyways. And Kronos represents time, limitations, cycles, the harsh but necessary lessons that mature us. When we say Saturn is transiting Aries, we're saying the archetypal teacher is moving into the realm of the archetypal warrior. Structure meeting action, discipline meeting courage, the old meeting the new. Now, traditional astrology works with 7 classical planets: the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and usually, hopefully, Pluto. I grew up when Pluto was still a planet, so for me, it's always going to be 8. And that's powerful, but I also work with asteroid astrology and god and goddess placements. This is not entirely traditional. Most traditional astrologers don't use goddess asteroids. But I'm not an astrologer. I'm a therapist and a priestess, and I think it's important to work with all the archetypal energies in your chart because the asteroids give us access to more nuanced archetypal energies, especially feminine archetypes that have been suppressed or ignored in patriarchal systems. Asteroids like Lilith, Isis, Persephone, Hecate, Kali, Medusa, who have done episodes on all of them at this point, I think. These are goddess energies that don't neatly fit into the 7 classical planets. They represent the wild feminine, the death and rebirth cycles, the rage, the underworld, the parts of ourselves that patriarchy tried to erase. And working with these archetypes helps us reclaim those suppressed parts. And again, you can work with these archetypes entirely psychologically, or you can work with them as archetypal energies that are also a deity. It's up to you. It's whatever your belief system holds. And so when I look at my chart, I don't just look at Saturn, Mars, Venus. I also look where Kali is. Because Kali at 4 degrees Sagittarius in my 11th house tells me something about my relationship to destruction, rage, and collective transformation. I look at where Lilith is, where Persephone is, where Isis is. Because these goddess placements reveal archetypal patterns in my psyche that the classical planets alone don't capture. And so now if you want to know your goddess placements, I have a new offering. It's called Goddess Astrology Maps. These are comprehensive 40-plus page reports that combine feminist mythological interpretation with precise technical astrology. I analyze your goddess and god placements, soul path, which is your north-south node analysis, retrograde patterns, and more. And there's a limited order option. I'm only doing 4 a month max. And if you want me to create your map for you, that is. But there's also a DIY course on thegoddesscoven.com. And there's dashes in that. It's the-goddess-coven.com. It's also just the links in the description and all over the place. But there's a DIY course, and that is meant to make this more accessible. If you want to learn how to run it yourself, I go through in there how to run it, and then, But whether you work with asteroids or not, the principle is the same, and that's that astrology is a language of archetypes. And when we understand the archetypal patterns in our chart, we understand the psychological and spiritual forces shaping our lives. Saturn isn't just a planet. Saturn is the archetype of the teacher, the one who says, grow up, take responsibility, build something solid, face your limitations, and become who you're meant to be. And that's what we're going to talk about now. Okay, so let's talk about Saturn, or as the Greeks called him, Kronos. In Hesiod's Theogony, written about 700 BCE, Kronos is a Titan, the youngest son of Uranus, aka Sky, and Gaia, aka Earth. And we should probably do an episode on Gaia. But in Hesiod's Theogony, Saturn's story, Kronos' story, is one of cycles, time, limitation, and ultimately redemption. So here's what happened. Uranus, the primordial sky god, was imprisoning his children, the Cyclopses and the 100-handed ones. I think that's what they're called. The 100-handed ones? Yeah. Back into Gaia's womb. He didn't want them to exist. He was suppressing creation itself. Gaia was in agony, and she called on her children, the Titans, to stop him. But only Kronos was willing to act. So Gaia gave him a sickle, a harvester's tool, not a weapon. And Kronos used it to stop his father from continuing to imprison his siblings. He severed Uranus's power. He freed his mother. He was defending the divine feminine. And then Kronos became the ruler of the cosmos. And under his rule, humanity experienced what the Greeks called the Golden Age. The Golden Age was a time of peace, abundance, prosperity. There was no war, no suffering. The earth gave freely. People lived in harmony. This was Kronos' reign. Structure, cycles, the natural order functioning as it should, held within a container. Saturn is really good at holding a container. But here's where the archetype gets complex. So in the story, Kronos was told by Gaia and Uranus that he too would be overthrown by his own son. So just as he had overthrown his father. So we're looking at an intergenerational trauma pattern here. And so out of fear, Kronos swallowed his children as they were born. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. One by one, he consumed them to prevent the prophecy from coming true. But his wife, Rhea, who was also a Titan, she tricked him. And when Zeus was born, she gave Kronos a stone wrapped in cloth instead of the baby. And so Zeus was hidden, raised in secret, until he was strong enough to return. And so Zeus forced Kronos to vomit up his siblings. And then, with the help of the Cyclopses and the 100-handed ones, whom Zeus had freed from Tartarus, the Olympians went to war with the Titans. The war lasted 10 years, and in the end, Zeus won. Kronos and the Titans were cast into Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld, to be imprisoned. But here's what's important. That's not the end of Kronos' story. According to Hesiod and Pindar, which are like Greek philosopher people, Kronos was eventually released by Zeus, and Zeus made him the ruler of the Isles of the Blessed, also called Elysium. Now, this is confusing because there's actually 2 Elysiums in Greek mythology. One is within Hades' realm, the underworld ruled by Hades, who, by the way, is not evil. Hades is the god of the dead, and his realm includes both punishment and paradise. Elysium in the underworld is paradise, and it's separated from the gloom of the rest of the underworld by the river Lethe, where virtuous souls go after death. But the Isles of the Blessed are beyond even that. They're located at the far western edge of the world, it's said, beyond the stream of Oceanus. And this is where the greatest heroes go. You could call it similar to like Valhalla concept. But in this mythology, those who've earned passage to Elysium 3 times through reincarnation, or who were so virtuous that they're given eternal paradise, go to the Isles of the Blessed. And Kronos rules there, not as tyrant, not as a destroyer, but as king of eternal peace, abundance, and rest. The golden age restored. So Kronos' arc is one of fall and redemption. He ruled justly, fell to fear and control, was defeated, imprisoned, did his time, then released. And then he was given a role that honors his original nature, the benevolent king of the harvest, the cycles, the eternal return. Now here's where Kronos becomes Saturn in astrology and why we associate him with time. The Greek word for time is chronos. And over the centuries, Kronos, the concept of time, became confused and merged with Cronus, the Titan. And I even messed them up. But Kronos, who we've been talking about, carried a sickle, a harvesting tool. And the association with time grew stronger. That sickle became symbolic of the harvest of time itself, the reaping of life, the cycles of birth, growth, death, and rebirth. By the Renaissance, this image evolved into Father Time, the old man with a long beard carrying a scythe, an hourglass, sometimes with wings, the one who marks the passage of time, who reminds us that everything is temporary, that all things come to an end. And eventually, Father Time's imagery merged with the Grim Reaper, death personified, the one who harvests souls. But here's what's crucial to understand. Kronos isn't death. He's time. He's the cycles. He's the teacher who says, everything has a season. Everything has a limit. You cannot hold on forever. You cannot stay a child. You must grow up. You must face your limitations. You must build something that lasts within the time you have. That's Saturn in astrology. Saturn's the archetype of the father, the teacher, the wise old man, the one who demands maturity. And they often talk about Saturn as restrictive. And while to some level that's true, something that I feel is also true is that Saturn is like the breaker of intergenerational patterns. So this week in particular, if you've been feeling like karmic stuff and intergenerational stuff, ancestral stuff has just been shedding off of you, slewing off, consciously or unconsciously, that is Saturn. That's Saturn. And so Saturn shows us where we need to grow up, where we're avoiding responsibility, where we need structure, discipline, and boundaries. Saturn's the part of us that says you can't do everything. You have limits, and within those limits, you must build something solid. Saturn rules time, aging, mortality, karma. Saturn rules the bones, the structure of the body. Saturn's home sign is Capricorn for that reason. And Saturn rules authority, both external and internal, our internalized sense of discipline and self-control. And in traditional astrology, Saturn is called a malefic, meaning a difficult planet, a challenging force. But Saturn isn't malefic because he's evil. Saturn is challenging because growth is challenging, because facing your limitations is hard, because becoming an adult, really becoming an adult, requires you to let go of the illusion that you're invincible, that you have infinite time, that someone else will take care of you, and also letting go of the illusion that you can do it all on your own. Holding both truths. Saturn says, no, you are responsible and you are mortal. You have limits. Now build something beautiful within those constraints. And that's actually very divine masculine, to create the container. What Saturn's doing is it's creating a container. It's asking you to create containers for yourself. It's asking you to be in your divine masculine and then let your divine feminine roam freely within the container that you created. And when you work with Saturn, when you stop resisting the lessons, when you stop avoiding the responsibility, Saturn becomes the greatest teacher you'll ever have. Because Saturn doesn't just restrict, Saturn also rewards. When you do the work, when you build solid foundations, when you mature into who you're meant to be, Saturn gives you mastery. Saturn gives you wisdom. And Saturn gives you the satisfaction of having built something that lasts. That's the golden age. That's Elysium. That's the reward for facing the teacher and doing the work. And that's what Saturn in Aries is asking all of us now. Take responsibility for forging your own path. Build disciplined courage. Grow up into your warrior self, your new warrior self. And and my Saturn return in Pisces taught me a lot of this, but Saturn in Pisces is a little bit of a different vibe. But I'm going to talk about that. I want to talk about that next, because what is a Saturn return? And when people hear this term, I think there's a lot of fear that comes up. And Saturn return is intense, but it doesn't need to be scary. I don't know if my story is going to make you feel less scared or more scared, but ultimately it's a good thing. It's a transition time. So what is a Saturn return exactly? Saturn takes approximately 29 and a half years to orbit the sun and return to the exact degree and sign it was in when you were born. This happens roughly 3 times in a human lifespan, around ages 29, 58, and 87. Your first Saturn return marks the transition from youth to adulthood. And Saturn stays in each sign for about 3 years, which is why I'm saying that mine ends now, even though it passed over my natal Saturn more than a year ago. But your first Saturn return is this transition from youth to adulthood. And your second return is the transition into elder wisdom. And your third, if you live to experience it, marks the transition into legacy and completion. But this is not just astrology. This timing lines up perfectly, like eerily perfectly, with established developmental psychology. So there's this psychologist, Erikson, one of the most influential developmental psychologists of the 20th century, and he proposed 8 stages of psychosocial development across the lifespan. And the ages of Saturn return correspond almost exactly to those major developmental transitions in his model. So your first Saturn return, ages 27 to 30, 28 to 31, depending on when it shifts for you, marks the shift from Erikson stage 6 to stage 7. Stage 6, which runs from about age 19 to 29, is called intimacy versus isolation. And yes, they all have annoying names like this. This is when you're establishing intimate relationships, figuring out who you are in relation to others, and forming your identity outside your family of origin. You're experimenting, you're trying things on, you're still becoming. But around age 30, Erikson says we enter stage 7, generativity versus stagnation. This is middle adulthood, ages 30 to 64-ish, and the developmental tasks shift. It's no longer just about you. It's about what are you contributing? What are you building? What are you creating? Are you generative, producing, creating, mentoring, contributing to the next generation? Or are you stagnant? So your first Saturn return is the astrological initiation into that shift. Saturn says, stop experimenting, stop avoiding commitment, stop pretending you have infinite time. decide, build, and take responsibility for your life. If you've built your 20s on unstable foundations, if you're in the wrong career, the wrong relationship, the wrong city, the wrong identity, Saturn will dismantle it. And this is, I think, why people give Saturn return a bad rep. But it's not to punish you. It's to teach you. It's to force you to rebuild on solid ground. That's why so many people experience major life shifts during their first Saturn return. Breakups, career shifts, moving, graduate school, starting businesses. But it's also good things like having kids, forming real, beautiful, authentic friendships, getting married. It's the universe saying, what you built in your 20s, does it actually support who you're becoming? And here's what's important. Highly sensitive people often feel Saturn return early. If you remember back to the Witch Wound episode, April and I talked about highly sensitive people, HSPs. But HSPs often feel their Saturn return up to 6 months before Saturn actually returns to your natal degree. So you might start feeling the pressure, the restlessness, the sense that something has to change. That's Saturn knocking on the door before he walks in. And your second Saturn return, ages 58 to 61-ish, marks a different transition. You're still technically in Erikson stage 7, which is generativity versus stagnation. But you're approaching stage 8, which is called integrity versus despair. Ominous, I know. Which begins around 65, but Erikson stages are developmental stages, and so they can be a little bit individualized. But stage 8 is about looking back on your life and asking, did I live well? Did I contribute? Do I have regrets? Can I accept my life as it was, or am I filled with despair over what I didn't do? So your second Saturn return is preparation for that reflection. Saturn is saying, like, you've been building for 30 years. What have you actually created? What needs to change before you enter the final stage of your life? And you have another 5 to 10 years of time when you could still be generating to do that. But this is when people reevaluate careers, relationships, purpose. People leave marriages that haven't been working for decades around age 60. This is when people finally pursue the thing they've always wanted to do, but were too afraid to try. They might go get a PhD or a master's degree in something completely different than what they've done their whole time. And this is when people also start into elder wisdom, have grandkids become grandparents, or resist it and stagnate. And if you live to your third Saturn return, which is around age 87, you're really deep in stage 8. You're in the final life review. You're asking, what was it all for? And hopefully you can say, I lived, I loved, I contributed, I became who I was meant to be. So Saturn returns aren't arbitrary. They align with the major developmental thresholds of human life. They mark the moments when we're psychologically ready and cosmically required to level up. Now, here's how Saturn return actually works in astrology. So Saturn returns to the exact sign, degree, and house it was in when you were born. So your Saturn return doesn't just say grow up. It says grow up in this specific way, in this specific area of your life. So for example, if your Saturn's in the 7th house, the house of partnerships, your Saturn return will be about relationships. Commitment, marriage, business partnerships, learning to show up for others without losing yourself. If your Saturn is in the 10th house, the house of career and public reputation, your Saturn return will be about stepping into your professional calling, building your career, taking responsibility for your public role. If your Saturn's in the 4th house, the house of home and family, your Saturn return will be about establishing roots, leaving your family of origin, creating your own home, dealing with family patterns. And the sign that Saturn is in tells you the flavor of the lesson. Saturn in Aries is learn disciplined courage. Take responsibility for your independence and your fieriness. Like Saturn in Pisces is more learning to honor your sensitivity. building boundaries in the formless, and facing your spiritual responsibility, which is an interesting concept. And then Saturn in Capricorn, its home sign. That's learn to build structures that last, take responsibility for your ambition, and so on. My Saturn is in Pisces in the second house, which means my Saturn return, which finally ends this Friday, was about learning to value and build stability in my body, my resources, and my material foundation, meaning worldly, all while navigating the dissolving, spiritual, boundaryless energy of Pisces. And let me tell you, that's a lot of what happened. So my Saturn return began in March 2023. And finally is ending this Friday, the 13th, after almost 3 full years. But I started feeling it earlier in the summer and fall of 2022 even. I felt the pressure building, the restlessness, the sense that something had to change, but I didn't know what yet. And then in December 2022, 6 months before Saturn officially entered Pisces, I left an emotionally abusive relationship. That was the pre-return, Saturn knocking on the door. And my Saturn is in Pisces in the second house, and the second house governs material resources, money, possessions, values, but it also governs body resources, your physical body, your throat, your voice, how you nourish yourself, what you value as foundational to your survival. And Pisces is water. Dissolution, spirituality, the formless, ancestral waters, the realm where boundaries dissolve and everything merges. So my Saturn return was about how do I build material and physical stability in a realm that has no form? How do I value my body when Pisces wants to transcend my body? How do I speak my truth when my throat is governed by a house that's being restricted by Saturn in the most boundaryless sign? And here's what happened. Throughout my Saturn return, I had kidney issues. 2 kidney stones total. They peaked as a problem during the return and caused chronic pain and fear. And now in traditional Chinese medicine, the kidneys are the organs that hold fear. So when your kidney energy is imbalanced, you experience anxiety, panic, irrational fear. And the kidneys are also associated with water, Pisces. And Saturn is restriction, limitation, crystallization. Kidney stones are literal crystallized restriction in the body's water system. And my body was holding fear, and this is the spiritual part that I've come to believe about it. But my body was holding fear, ancestral fear. The fear of speaking, the fear of being visible, the witch wound, the fear that if I speak my truth, I'll be punished, silenced. And that fear was stuck, literally stuck, as a stone in my body. And in February 2025, the last stone moved, or so I thought. But it turned out it hadn't actually left my body. It had gotten stuck in my ureter, and it stayed there for 9 months. Now that's wild, I know, but I didn't know it was stuck. I assumed that the pain I'd been feeling was from an ovarian cyst because it was lower, and I had no idea that there was still a stone lodged in my body. And then in November 2025, I recorded the first episode of this podcast. The episode where I publicly claimed my identity and where I started to speak my truth for the first time in a way that was recorded, permanent, public. And I claimed myself as a priestess. That was the identity I was claiming. It was actually later that I claimed myself as therapist and priestess. That's episode 8, I believe. But after I recorded the first episode of this podcast on November 5th, maybe, the stone caused me massive pain, emergency level pain. And so we went to the ER. My partner took me to the ER, and that's when I found out that it had been stuck there the whole time. So within days, I had emergency surgery to remove the kidney stone on November 7th, 2025. And the stone had been stuck in my ureter for 9 months. blocking flow, holding fear, and it took me speaking my truth publicly, launching the podcast, claiming my priestess identity, for my body to say, this has to come out now. I interpreted that as the ancestors weren't happy, or they were terrified. The witch wound was activating, the fear of visibility, of speaking, of claiming my power. It was surging through my body as the stone reacted to me speaking my truth. The ancestral pattern was breaking. The fear was being released. And there's a lot of connections to this, but you'll remember earlier I talked about Saturn being the intergenerational trauma breaker. And here's another connection. The second house governs the throat, the voice, speech. And so Saturn in Pisces in the second house meant restriction in my ability to speak spiritual truth, restriction in my voice, fear held in my body that was blocking my throat, my truth, my ability to speak. And the only way to release the fear held in my kidneys was to use my voice, to speak, to claim my truth publicly. The kidney stone was teaching me, you can't hold this fear anymore. You have to speak. You have to use your voice. That's how you heal. And even before then, there was this piece around speaking, because when I left that emotionally unsafe relationship, there was some time that passed, but eventually I met my current partner and I had to learn to stand up for myself again, to voice my needs, to say no, to have boundaries after that had been unsafe. And I did that. But it was kind of like this was the final piece. Anyways, yeah. Saturn's a lot. And for any of you that are like, I don't want to have kidney stones, you won't. That's probably not your Saturn return journey. Aries is going to be a very, very different energy. But I think it's important to look at it and look at your life and how different it can be 3 years from now. And now's the time to dream. And Saturn can help you give form to that dream. And I learned something else during my Saturn return too, which is important. As many of you know, I fell 75 feet in April 2025, just at the tail end of Saturn's first pass through Pisces. And then it briefly moved into Aries. And I had 22 skin grafts, 11 on each hand. I couldn't use my hands for months. I couldn't work. I couldn't write. I couldn't do anything on my own. That's now episode 11, if you haven't heard the story. But that taught me I can't do it all alone. I need support. I need my community. I need my partner, and I need help. Saturn basically said, okay, like, we spent a lot of this return teaching you that you're powerful on your own. And now you think you're invincible. You think you can build everything by yourself, but you're wrong. You're still human. You have limits and you need people. So my Saturn return taught me to honor my body, to recognize that I can't build something great on unstable foundations, physically, materially, or spiritually. And it taught me that it's okay to need physical and material safety as solid ground to work from. That wanting stability isn't weakness. That valuing my body, my resources, my foundation, that's not shallow. That's necessary. And it taught me to speak my truth, to use my voice, to break the ancestral pattern of silence and fear. And it taught me that I can't do it alone. That needing support, needing partnership, needing community, that's not failure. That's maturity. I'm still building what all of this means for myself. I haven't arrived yet. There's some stuff that's shedding even this week, even yesterday and today. There's big energy moving. And so I'm not done. The Saturn return is ending. And some stuff is ending with it, and I can feel that. But there's some stuff where the work continues. And that's okay, because that's what Saturn does. Saturn doesn't give you the answers. Saturn gives you the foundation. And then it's up to you to keep building. Yeah, so back to the collective. Saturn is in Aries this Friday until 2028. So what does that mean? So first, let's talk about what people with Saturn in Aries natal, those of you whose Saturn return is coming, might experience. And then we'll get to the collective. But for those of you with natal Saturn in Aries, you got a preview last May through August 2025, when Saturn briefly moved into Aries before retrograding back into Pisces. That was a taste, a glimpse of what's coming. Now Saturn is in Aries for real on Friday. And over the next couple years, Saturn will retrograde back and forth over your natal Saturn degree, testing you. And it goes over your exact degree more than once. That's what I mean by retrograde back and forth. So your Saturn return's about to begin. And Saturn in Aries is a specific kind of lesson. This isn't Saturn in Pisces, dissolving boundaries, spiritual surrender, honoring sensitivity. This is Saturn in Aries, disciplined action, mature courage, taking responsibility for forging your own path. Aries is the warrior, the pioneer, the one who goes first, the one who acts, the one who initiates. But Aries can also be impulsive, reckless, and occasionally a little self-centered. And Aries can charge forward without thinking. Aries can be all fire and no foundation. And so Saturn says, no, you need to grow up your warrior self. You need disciplined courage. You need to take responsibility for your actions, for your independence, for how you show up in the world, for forging your own path. And if you have Saturn in Aries natal, your Saturn return will probably ask you, can you take action without being reckless? Can you be independent without being isolated? Can you lead without dominating? Can you assert yourself without burning bridges? And can you build something that lasts? And here's what's crucial. Where Aries falls in your chart, what house Saturn is transiting through, tells you where this lesson is happening in your life. If Aries is in your first house, Saturn's teaching you about your identity, self-expression, your physical body. If Aries is in your 7th house, it's teaching you about relationships, partnerships, how you assert yourself with others. And your 10th house is career, public role, your leadership. I'll do a few more. 4th house, Saturn would be asking you to create a home that's truly yours, to break from family patterns, to lead your own household with courage and structure. In the 11th house, Saturn's probably asking you to build community, to step into leadership in groups, to create new networks with responsibility. So the house tells you the specific area of life where Saturn in Aries is demanding that you grow up your warrior self. And here's something else that's really important. This is a key nuance that probably a lot of people don't mention, but my partner is one of these people that's got this, so I'm going to talk about it. If Saturn is transiting your north node or your south node, there's an extra layer to this. And your north node, for those of you that don't know, is where your soul is going. It's your life path, your purpose, your growth edge. And your south node is where you're coming from. Your past life skills, your comfort zone, what you're meant to release or rework in service of your north node. And for the first 30 years of your life, you've mostly been relearning the lessons of your south node. But Saturn return is going to ask you to start stepping towards your north node. So if Saturn is conjunct your south node, you're being asked to rework your relationship to that house and that energy in service of your north node. Saturn says you're too comfortable here. You're relying on old patterns, and it's time to mature this and use it to serve where you're actually going. And if Saturn is conjunct your north node, the Saturn lesson is doubled. Because Saturn is landing on the exact place your soul is trying to go. This is major initiation. Saturn becomes a really important archetype for you to work with. The teacher is showing you exactly what you need to learn to step into your life path. And if Saturn's on your north node, part of your life path is becoming the teacher, right? Like that's an archetype for you to become. That's like part of your soul path journey. So if you have Saturn in Aries natal and it's also on your north or south node, pay attention. this Saturn return is especially significant for you. Okay, so now let's talk about Saturn and Aries collectively for all of us. So Saturn and Aries is a cultural shift, a societal shift, a collective lesson. For the last few years, we've had Saturn in Pisces, dissolution, collective grief, the pandemic, the collapse of old structures, spiritual awakening, sensitivity, boundaries dissolving. But now Saturn's in Aries, and the collective lesson is stop waiting, stop processing, stop retreating. It's time to act. Saturn in Aries says, build something new. Build the new. Take responsibility for your courage. Create the future you want to see. Don't just resist what's dying. Create what's being born. And here's what's really powerful. Saturn entering Aries is happening at the same time as Neptune entering Aries. I mean, Neptune's technically already there. We talked about that last week. But it's like a few weeks apart. And on, what date is it? I said it in the beginning, the 20th. Neptune and Aries will be in conjunction. That means they're at the exact same degree. So depending on where you were on the planet, if you looked up at the sky, Neptune and Aries would be like crossing over each other, almost like they're having like a little eclipse moment. That does not happen frequently. I don't even have a statistic for how often that happens because it's that rare. And so Neptune in Aries is spirituality as action, the spiritual warrior, mysticism that moves, faith that builds. And Saturn in Aries is disciplined action, mature courage. And so together they're saying, this is the era of the spiritual warrior. I'm going to say that again. This is the era of the spiritual warrior. This next 2-3 years, this is the time to build the new world. Not just dream it, build it. So for all of us, Saturn in Aries asks, where do you need to take disciplined action? Where do you need to stop waiting for permission and just go? Where do you need to build something solid through your courage? Look at where Aries falls in your chart. That's the area of life where Saturn is asking you to step up, to lead, to pioneer, to take responsibility for forging your own path. Wherever Aries is in your chart, that's where Saturn is demanding, grow up your warrior self, act with discipline, build with courage. This is the collective work for the next 2.5-3 years. And this is the initiation we're all going through together. Saturn in Aries says the time for just thinking about it is over, and the time for building is now. Okay, so that was a lot, and we talked about archetypes, mythology, Saturn returns, developmental psychology, my kidney stones, fun, ancestral fear, Saturn in Aries. I mean, there was a lot of information I just gave you, and you don't need to retain it all. And we're going to move into practice right now. And I just want us to ground, because Saturn rules the bones, the literal structure of your body, your foundation. So let's ground into that now. Let's reinforce your body foundation before you go back out into the world. So first, just find a comfortable position. You can be sitting or lying down, just making sure your body feels supported. This particular practice I would recommend not doing while driving. And because it's important to just let yourself close your eyes right now. To soften your gaze. And take a deep breath in and out. Take another breath. And just let your body feel heavy. And when you're ready, start to bring your attention to your bones. Not your muscles, not your skin, not your organs, your bones. The deepest structure inside you. The foundation that holds everything else up. And as you do this, I want you to remember that your bones are not like some skeleton on TV. Your bones are living. Your bones are not dry and brittle. They are solid, but they are also wet and they're full of bone marrow. They are alive. So just bring your attention to your bones. Start with your feet, maybe. Feel the bones in your feet, the small bones of your toes, the bones of your ankles. These bones are holding you, supporting you. They've been with you your whole life. And just move your attention up to your shins, your knees, your thigh bones, your femurs, the longest, strongest bones in your body. And if it feels okay for you, and if it doesn't, just skip this part. But if it feels okay for you, feel the weight of your pelvis, the bowl of bone that holds your organs, that connects your spine to your legs. And then feel your spine. Each vertebra stacked on top of the other, from your tailbone all the way up to the base of your skull. Your spine is your central axis, your core structure, the thing that holds you upright. And then feel your ribs, the cage of bone that protects your heart and lungs. Feel how your ribs expand and contract with each breath. Your ribs are both protection and breath, structure and movement. Feel your shoulder blades, your collarbones, your arms, the bones of your upper arms, your elbows, your forearms, wrists, hands. Feel the small, tiny bones in your fingers, the ones that let you touch, hold, create. And now feel your skull. The bone that protects your brain, your jaw, your teeth, the hardest bones in your body. Your bones are your foundation. They don't change quickly. They grow slowly. They hold you. And Saturn rules the bones because Saturn is about what lasts, what's solid, what takes time to build. And right now you're being asked to trust your bones, to feel your foundation, to know that you have structure inside of you. Even if everything else feels uncertain, even if you're in the middle of a Saturn return and everything's changing, even if you're being asked to grow up in ways that feel uncomfortable, you have bones, you have structure, you have a foundation. So just take one more deep breath. Feel your bones holding you. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for doing this work. I'll see you in the next episode. Subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Trust the spiral. This podcast offers spiritual and psychological education and priestess wisdom. This is not therapy, counseling, or mental health treatment. If you need mental health support, please contact a licensed provider, and in a mental health emergency in the U.S., call 988.